why don't we just start with you introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Sami Edge. I am a higher education reporter at the Oregonian. I'm a U of O alum and was editor of the Emerald in 2014-15.
Cool. And just to get kind of a sense of your trajectory through the field, what was it about journalism that you found interesting that you wanted to pursue as a career?
Sure. I mean, I think at first and still, I've really always been inspired by the ability of journalism to shine light on injustice and, lead to change. I think kind of more selfishly, another thing that I really love about journalism is just getting to have so many cool life experiences and, spend days walking in other people's shoes. Um, I've had some adventures that I don't think I could have had in another career. A couple months ago, I watched a body get embalmed on assignment. So, it's just lots of fun to be able to tap into other people's lives to live their adventures for a day.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. And you held internships before you even got to the Emerald. I mean, Reno News and Review and then the Sparks Tribune, which is different than a lot of the other alumni we've interviewed in the past because they kind of used the Emerald as that foundation piece to build their careers. So I'm curious, was there anything you took from those internships that helped you during your time as editor in chief when you were at the Emerald?
Yeah, so that first internship at the Reno News and Review, which is an alt weekly in the town where I grew up, Reno, Nevada. Um, one of my assignments every week was to go do man on the street interviews to, just fill out a column with a random question. I think, we asked people, what's your favorite natural disaster? Random things like that. Um, I feel like as a high school student, that was a really good preparation for working at the Emerald or anything else I did in journalism. It made me decide early on whether I could handle doing man on the street interviews, which I know is scary for some young journalists. So having that experience in high school, getting the hang of it, learning that even if it was scary, I could hack it. That was definitely good preparation for, introducing myself to strangers all throughout my career.
Hmm. And what kind of reporting did you do at the Emerald before you became editor in chief?
Yeah, so when I started, I was on the news team. I was doing breaking news, and then I was actually a higher education reporter at the Emerald, which strangely has now prepared me for this job. Not quite a
Hmm.
decade later. Really gave me some foundation that I'm using today, which is funny. And then I think I was a investigative news editor and or investigative news reporter and assistant news editor. You just kind of bounce around until I applied for editor in chief. I applied my sophomore year and served as editor my junior year.
Hmm. So was covering higher education something that you knew you wanted to pursue all the way back when you first started?
No, not really. Some journalists find the beat that is their calling early on, and I've kind of enjoyed exploring different beats. I'm looking forward to doing more of that in my career too. It's been great to get to know education, and I'm certainly happy here at the moment. But you know, throughout my career, I've done crime and K-12 education, and now I'm on higher ed, and would love to someday do climate reporting and health reporting, and maybe circle back to criminal justice. So I'm happy to bounce around and learn new things on every beat.
Hmm. And you have, I mean, you have a very well-versed career. You've done photojournalism, crime, investigative reporting, as you said. What do you think have been the biggest differences between those fields, and which one, if you had to narrow it down, would be the most challenging?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, I would certainly say I'm still just getting started in my career. Just, I graduated not even 6 years ago. So hopefully there's a lot more in my future. From what I've done so far, I would say, whether it was crime reporting or education reporting or reporting on some more investigative topics, they all share the same baseline, which is, I mean, be a good human, first of all, right? People are going to honor integrity your integrity as a reporter, your ability to, be transparent with sources and kind of explain your process. That's something that's always been important to me. Um, so I think the hardest beat that I've had was probably the daily crime reporting, just because I did that at a small paper. I was the only crime reporter, and so that meant every single crime assignment was mine, every single body was mine to cover. And that was a really good learning experience. But after a couple years, started to get kind of heavy. So I needed a break from that.
Hmm. Let's move into some of the higher education stuff that you've reported. I know we were talking before we started recording here that you worked in Idaho uh, as a higher education reporter, and my parents, coincidentally, are actually both teachers in Idaho in Twin Falls. Um, so I'm just curious, during the height of the pandemic, I mean, I was obviously still at home when they were teaching remotely, and then there was some resistance when they went back to classes, and people weren't wanting to wear masks because Idaho is such a conservative state. Um, so I'm just wondering if that's something that you noticed and kind of what that whole shutdown looked like from a journalistic perspective.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we had so much to write about during the pandemic, as did everyone. But what is really striking to me now, especially now that I'm covering education in Oregon, was just how quickly the pandemic went in Idaho. And I only say that because Idahoans, like 6 months after COVID started, were ready to pretend that
Mhm.
COVID was over.
Exactly.
And I feel like you really saw that in the school systems. You know, school shut down for a couple months at the end of the 2020 school year. And then as soon as fall 2020-21 started, a lot of schools were just kind of back to normal. A lot of them didn't have mask mandates. Um, and I think there were some real questions there about what that meant for the safety of students and the safety of teachers. Um, on the other hand, it's really interesting now to be in Oregon, which was much more cautious with its closures and its distance learning, but has really seen some huge education slides in terms of lost learning during the pandemic. Um, so it's not on me to say whether Idaho did things right or wrong, but I think it will be really telling kind of as we go forward to see what did it mean for Idaho students' education that they were back in school so quickly, where 6 hours west in Portland, kids were out of school for a whole nother year.
Hmm. Yeah. Did you get a lot of a kind of a sense of that teacher perspective? Like, were you in communication with any of those people? Because I know obviously it's kind of tough working remotely. Um, but I mean, certainly, I mean, the politics don't speak for all the teachers who are in the schools.
Yeah, I mean, I would say uh, poor teachers everywhere, right? But in Idaho, I know a lot of the teachers were much more cautious about going back into classrooms and had administrators who were saying like, "Nope, you got to be in the building. Nope, we're not going to mandate masks." So I'm sure that was really difficult for teachers, and we heard that from teachers through the pandemic. Um, Also, I mean, I think very quickly teachers went from being revered to vilified. And certainly we saw that the largest school district in Idaho is just west of Boise. That's the West Ada School District. And um, there was a lot of vitriol aimed at teachers who were cautious about returning to school when parents really wanted to go back to school, were cautious about mask mandates. So I think I mean, it's just been a really hard time to be a teacher anywhere. And I think in Idaho, teachers got blamed for classrooms being closed. Even when that wasn't justified.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an undervalued job, I feel like, not only because, the pay isn't near what they deserve, but the standard is really lower. I know in Idaho that all you need to be a substitute teacher is a high school diploma, which is just, crazy. Um, so has your time covering education made you more empathetic to the profession in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I was interested in education reporting, I guess I'll start with the fact that I was a crime reporter before an education reporter, and it was crime reporting that kind of showed me the ways that schools can impact students' lives. I covered a lot of child welfare issues in New Mexico. I covered one huge child homicide in particular, um, and you could see very easily where the school maybe lost track of this kid, and the school could have maybe alerted police or something, right? So I was really interested when I got into education in what's that overlap where schools deal with child safety and really looking out for the well-being of kids as a whole. And throughout education reporting, I mean, schools just do everything for students, right? It's not about reading, it's not about sitting in the classroom. Like obviously that's why you're there, but schools just take care of kids from feeding them to making sure they got clothes, looking out for them, making sure they're showing up during the pandemic. So I've got so much empathy for educators who just care about the well-being of these children overall.
Hmm. So you cover education in Idaho for 2 years, and then you go back to Oregon. You're at the Oregonian now, covering higher education. What is the contrast between the two from a reporting standpoint?
Oh, it's massive. When I was in Idaho, I pitched a project and for a couple of years focused really intensely on Latino student outcomes. Idaho schools just don't help Latino students achieve the same outcomes as their white peers broadly. And when we started reporting on it, nobody wanted to talk about it. Latino families did, but education leaders in the state didn't want to. Equity was a dirty word. While I was there, the state house took aim at Boise State University for having, cultural centers and a Black graduation, and said, these things are antithetical to the Idaho way. So paying attention to equity and diversity in that state draws fire from the far right. And so now to be in Oregon, where equity is baked into policies, where there are state committees talking about, how important it is to help ensure that students have, equal outcomes regardless of their backgrounds, or finances. It's really kind of a jarring contrast.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's absurd. And I know that as journalists, we have an obligation to present the truth in a really unbiased way. But when there's so much of those problems, especially in higher education, which, can be a sensitive topic because you're talking about, young kids, from keeping your thoughts from seeping into your pieces.
Um, I think yes, we strive to be fair and accurate in our reporting. I think the stories that we tell will always show the topics that we're interested in covering, right? Just the stories that we're choosing to write, kind of convey our interest. Um, and I think for me, I didn't ever need to put my own opinion in my stories because the people that I spoke to were much closer to the issues and were much more eloquent than I could ever be. So,
Hmm.
it's really been easy for me, I think, to try instead to focus on being a conduit to, allow these other folks who are really close to these issues to highlight how they're thinking and how they're feeling about an issue and how it's impacting their life. So, throughout anything I do, I really try to make sure that I can find sources who are directly impacted by what I'm talking to and just focus on their life experience.
Hmm. And I mean, during your time at the Oregonian, or any of the publications you worked for, is there a specific story you can point to that has been a personal favorite or maybe the most rewarding for the community and for yourself?
Yeah, that's hard. I feel like I've done a lot of rewarding things. I think um, I mentioned that child homicide story that will always really stick with me. That was something that I covered. It was a huge case in northern New Mexico that I covered throughout my time as a crime reporter. And I think through reporting, we were able to show several points where um, the child welfare system had failed this child, and the person who was accused of killing him was a felon wanted by the law, and there were several points where um, he could have been, back behind bars since he was wanted for these crimes, and um, so I feel really strongly about being able to kind of highlight all of these failed intersections where hopefully the state has now made some progress.
Hmm. All right, and we're getting a little late on time, but before we go, if you were to talk to young Sammy just starting out at the Emerald, what's one piece of advice you'd give yourself? And then what's a piece of advice you'd give to other aspiring reporters wanting to cover education news or any other medium?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I could talk to young Sammy. And I guess this advice would be for any students graduating from the SOJC, where, you see all of these really super successful alum go straight to New York City to work for these huge outlets, right? And I think there's a lot of discussion about going to work at the biggest newspaper right out of school and how prestigious that is. Um, I think there's a lot of value in local news that doesn't really get kind of applauded in the same way. I don't think, I think it's a great thing to start at a local news outlet to learn what it means to be a good community reporter and work your way up. So I guess I would say, don't be disappointed to start small. Um, that doesn't mean that that you're a failure as a journalist candidate or that you haven't made it. It's just a different entry point and one that's really super valuable for communities and for democracy.
Mhm. All right. Uh, Great interview, Sammy. Thank you so much for joining me for this.
Yeah, of course. I love the Emerald. I love talking to alum. Happy to help however I can.
Awesome. You have a good one.
Thank you. You too.